Welcome back, David. As I was just saying to you before, congrats again on a fantastic AgriTech Action conference. It was really everything. Well done.
Well, thank you, and all credit really goes to the team. We had Claire, we had Daniela, we had an amazing team that came together, and I think it was at least 10 different workshops spanning multiple time zones, including Asia, Europe. It was a lot of fun to see it all happen, and I give all credit to the team. When it performs well, you know the team has done their work to actually make it a success.
It does take a village. It's not to get cliche-ish, it does. You can't win the championship on your own, even if you're LeBron. You can't win it
Exactly.
Close, but you can't do it on your own. So this is what we call a revisit. Can you give us a little bit of an idea of what's been happening? I know there's a lot, but what's been happening and what you're looking forward to?
Sure. 2020 obviously has been as the proverb goes, may you live in interesting times. And I think we are living in interesting times in terms of, obviously there's a pandemic, but there's also this interesting, you're seeing this, the world is beginning to question, how do we want to live? How do we want to use data technology as societies? And you see certain countries like China saying, we want to use it to make increase public safety and be more automated, but at the same time, maybe losing some freedoms or maybe loss of privacy. And that's their choice that they're going to make for their country. You see Europe, on the other hand, pushing forward with general data protection regulation, GDPR, saying, you have to have the right to choose. But the question is, how do you implement this in a way that actually matters? Because we're bombarded with data and information requests. And if you have to check that box every time you see it, it doesn't really scale. I've been pushing for a long time, and I think since about 2013, 2014, that we need to have digital agents acting on our behalf. And they're sort of like our advocate. And you can talk to the digital agent, have a natural conversation, and the agent might say, in general, do you want to have things that are free, but that also might mean that you may be sharing some of your data and the data might be used for purposes beyond the app? Or do you want to be more reserved in terms of how you use your data and more withholding of it, but then you may not necessarily get things for free. You may have to do the paid app as a result, but it can actually serve on our behalf. And in the midst of all this, we also see this interesting redefining of what used to be called, the political left, the political right. That's actually increasingly becoming blurred and getting thrown out the window because it's the wrong dimension. If anything, the challenges we face as societies are really multidimensional in nature. And the challenge, though, is people who try to span the middle or try to be bridge builders and say, how can we make this work together, are finding it really hard because it's this period of confusion as we try to figure out this new world we've gone into that's been accelerated by COVID-19 that we have to navigate for specific questions about how do we want to uplift people, how do we want to uplift peace, how do we uplift the world as a whole so that we can share in the prosperity of what data and technology is doing for us all.
Well, you said something that really hit home with me just before. You said, we talked about how AI and other technologies can certainly have a lot of positive impact on education, on equal access to healthcare, et cetera. But you said, but we also have to bring the heart and soul along with it. And there's different cultures. Can you share about that?
Sure. Well, if anything, what COVID-19 has done, and we already had these trends underway that the world was getting interconnected. It was increasingly seeing an explosion of bots, an explosion of the use of algorithms. But COVID-19 accelerated us, and we've been plunged at least 5 years ahead in the future, if not more. And so we're sort of physically as if we are in 2025, but our heart and souls haven't had time to catch up with the change that COVID-19 has done. Because we're all now, if we're fortunate enough to work, we're working remotely. Some of us can't do that. We're sort of distanced. I mean, here we are talking on video. And so the world has been propelled forward much faster with how technology is reshaping societies, but thinking about our hearts and souls of societies, and there's going to be different answers for different communities. How do we want to use these technologies so that we're going in with intentionality to be more people-centered as opposed to accidentally finding out, does this work or not for the society that we want to have in the future ahead?
Yeah, I think, we talk a lot about the human element, and there's so many cases where vaccines, do people trust it? We talked about, China making their decision and US and Europe making their decisions. Well, there's boundaries, but there's really no boundaries. We're all together. How do we come together, in that? And so I get the sense you see 2021 as a pretty positive, full of opportunity year.
I'm always an optimist. In fact, I think, one can be a pragmatic optimist in the sense that you're recognizing that at the end of the day, it's the choices we humans make that determine good versus bad outcomes. But that's choices we have. And it's also recognizing that optimists are the ones that actually change the future. If you're not an optimist and you're just sitting there admiring the problem. The other thing I would say is if there's, in some respects, this has been a long time coming. As you know, back in 2000, I joined the Bioterrorism Preparedness Response Program, was later involved with the response to 9/11 and the anthrax events. But later in 2003, I had a chance to give a briefing to the intelligence community, the U.S. intelligence community. And my briefing takeaway was I was not sure organizing by nation states or solely by nation states made sense past 2030. And the reason was twofold. One, where do packets of information stop on the internet? Is it who sends it or who it receives? And so, like you said, we're all interconnected. We can't go it alone in terms of geographical borders. But also, I said at the time in 2003, infectious diseases don't stop at borders either. And of course, now we're living that. But it was also recognizing this was not just about natural things, but we're going to be entering in the next decade personalized medicine, which means we can tailor therapies to you. But also in the wrong hands, personalized medicine can also be personalized poison. And so how are we going to address that? That still makes me an optimist though, because what we're seeing is technologies that used to only be available to large nation states and their intelligence communities 30 years ago, increasingly are available to individuals and companies. Now, we have a responsibility to make sure they're available equally, that they're not lopsided or things like that. But we have to sort of recognize that we are super empowering people to do things that were only possible by a very few 30 or 40 years ago. And I tell people, the good news is technology is getting democratized. The challenging news is technology is getting democratized unevenly. Therefore, we have to have a responsibility for our hearts and souls to catch up with this world and say, how do we want to live collectively as well as individually in this new future ahead?
Yeah, it is brilliant. And as this is a quick revisit, I saw a quote the other day that was shared with me. It said, it was a quote by Rumi. He said, "Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there."
Exactly. Well, and I think that's at the end of the day, we're all human. Now, that also recognizes that being human means a kaleidoscope of perspectives, experiences. I know you and I have talked, Mark, about we need to have ways to increase empathy. Empathy both in person, also empathy digitally, especially if COVID-19 continues to go on for a while. We need to have the ability for you to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. Because right now, I think, unfortunately, and I don't label it on any one technology, whether it's algorithms, social media, or just social distancing, but we seem so quick to judge, and we don't seem to be willing to pause and take a step back and say, even if I don't necessarily agree with what this person's saying, there still may be some merit in understanding what shaped their perspective, what experiences shaped it. And if I listen to him, I may actually be able to find some common ground. And so if I look with optimism to 2021, it's trying to find, not just in the United States, but around the world, with our colleagues, obviously in China and Asia, and also thinking about Europe, but also thinking about South America, Africa, around the world. Can we find ways to build empathy, both digitally and in person, to raise that human consciousness to say, at the end of the day, we're all human, which means we're all born, we all live, and eventually we'll all pass away. How can we make the most of this as a planet and as a shared species, thinking about the greater world and uplifting the world as a whole for the future ahead?
That's a great way to, I would say, end, but let's make it a great way to start for this. So as always, thanks, really appreciate it, and happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, Mark. Happy Thanksgiving to you as well. And I would say, be bold, be brave, and be benevolent.